Hello and welcome back to Dr. Morton's Hour of Power. We're here today to talk about a second different theory of well-being or of the good life. We're using those terms interchangeably. And that is to say a theory, an answer to the question, what makes someone's life go well or what makes someone's life good? Now, you may hear good and think morally good, like are they a morally good person? Let me clarify that that's not what we're talking about here. We're asking what makes someone's life go well for them. Is it that they need to be happy or get what they want or be a good person? So that's an answer to the question where the two notions of goodness come together. It might be that what makes your life go well for you is being a good person. And a lot of people have thought that, and a lot of people have had problems with that, pointing to obvious cases where being a good person makes your life suck for you. But it's that notion of your life going well or poorly for you that we're interested in this section. We've talked about one answer to the question. Let me share screen and review what we've done so far. We've talked about hedonism. We defined hedonism. We talked about some reasons to think it's true. We looked at some major objections to hedonism. And now we're going to consider a different theory, the desire satisfaction theory of well-being. Okay, so now to get started, we're going to do an activity. This activity is going to be for participation credit. I'll tell you more in an email about the nature of the assignment. For now, you can write down in a Word document answers to these questions, which I'll put on the screen in just a minute. But the purpose of the activity is this. You might be thinking, okay, so we're talking about, generally the theory we're going to talk about today is the theory that what makes someone's life go well is getting what they want. Getting what you want is what makes you live a good life, is what results in your living a good life. And you might wonder, well, how is that different from happiness? It seems like I'm happy when I get what I want, and when I'm happy, I get what I want, right? Those two things go together hand in hand. You might think it's hard to think of cases where you're happy but you don't get what you want, or you get what you want and you're not happy. So the purpose of this activity is to try to tease out the difference between these two theories by teasing out cases where those could actually come apart, where you could be happy but not get what you want, where you could get what you want and not be happy. So take a minute. I'm not going to leave you the time here. I'm going to let you pause this recording to complete the assignment. I'm going to move on immediately, so pause once I get through with the question. Let me share my screen and show you that question. Here it is right here. So I'm looking for you to give an example in which someone experiences pleasure. That's the notion of happiness we're dealing with here, but they had no desire for the object of that pleasure. And then I'm going to ask you for an example in which someone's desire is satisfied. So they did want what they got, but they feel no pleasure. Okay. So you're going to open a Word document and give those, you're going to end up giving two answers, right? And there'll be examples that fit these criteria. So take a minute now. You can pause now. Okay, now I hope hopefully you're unpaused. You're watching the rest of the video. I'm going to, hopefully you came up with some really good examples. The examples I would give, which I don't want you to give, if you didn't pause, I'm expecting you to give different examples from these. If you happen to give that one and now you're hearing me say it, well, you can note that in your document. If both of them are the same, go ahead and try to give at least one that differs from one of my examples, if that makes sense. You can note that you came up with my two examples if you want, and you're giving one just so that you are differing from my examples in the document. So an example in which someone experiences pleasure but had no desire for the object of that pleasure. Think about maybe a surprise birthday party. You might not even know that you like surprise birthday parties the first time someone throws someone for you. I've never had one thrown for me. Let's take a minute and cry about that a little bit. I don't know if I would like it. I think I would. I guess it's going to depend on the day. If I've had a really horrible day, I might just want to sit in front of the TV and watch The Office for 2 hours straight instead of having to deal with people. Or maybe Anyway, so, but you can imagine someone liking them, being in a good mood, not knowing it was coming, and maybe not even knowing that they like it, but being pleased when it happens. They had no desire for a surprise party. Or just think about some cases where someone gets something that they didn't even know existed, right? Someone gives you a present, it's some new gadget, you didn't even know it existed. You feel pleasure, you had no desire for that thing because you can't have a desire for something you don't know exists. Okay, next, an example in which someone's desire is satisfied, but they feel no pleasure. Let me stop sharing for a minute here. Think about just cases where you're uninformed about what will actually satisfy you. And I'm actually very sure that everyone has had this experience, getting what they want and being totally unhappy, right? You want to date someone, maybe. You end up dating them, and then it's just not what you expected at all. You wanted to date them legitimately, but then you're totally unhappy. You want something for Christmas, some particular present. You think it's going to be awesome. You get it, and it sucks. And so you're unhappy, but you got what you wanted. These cases are all over the place. I mean, I hope, maybe it'd be good if none of y'all had ever experienced getting what you want and being unhappy, but it happens a lot. So those are some examples. What those examples are supposed to show is that getting what you want and being happy are two separate things. And so a theory that defines well-being or a good life in terms of getting what you want is legitimately substantively different from the theory on which the good life consists of happiness or pleasure, as we're conceiving of happiness, to make it simple. Okay, so I'll give you real quick the theory, the desire satisfaction theory. Here it is. Something is intrinsically good for you if and to the extent that it satisfies your desires, and nothing else is intrinsically good for you. And again, just like with hedonism, you can do parallel theses for badness. Something is bad for you just to the extent that it fails to satisfy your desires, or is what you want not to happen, which is different from it not satisfying your desires, right? You might have no desire at all for a tennis racket. You get it, it doesn't satisfy your desires, but that's different from you wanting not to have a tennis racket and getting one, right? That's getting what you want not to have. So not getting what you want is different from getting what you want not to happen, if that makes sense. And I think we might have a choice on how to formulate the desire satisfaction theory. You might say something is only intrinsically bad for you if you wanted it not to happen. Whereas if you just didn't want it, but you didn't necessarily want it not to happen, then it might not be bad for you on this theory. It's just neutral. It's not good for you or bad for you. And there are lots of things like that, right? Lots of things are neither good nor bad for you. So that's probably the way this theory is going to go. But we're going to focus for simplicity on the goodness claim, that something's intrinsically good for you just when it satisfies your desires, and nothing else can make something intrinsically good for you. That's the only thing that can make something intrinsically good for you. Okay, I have this question here because normally we would talk about this a little bit, but obviously we can't here. So let me skip ahead one slide and talk about a sense in which the desire satisfaction theory and hedonism actually have something in common, and what might make us, if you're thinking, man, these sound really similar theories, this might capture why you think that they're similar. So there are two broad classification, or there's one broad debate among views of the good life. And so gives you a classification of views of the good life. There are lots of objective theories of the good life and lots of subjective theories of the good life. Well, what's the difference? Well, hedonism and the desire satisfaction theory are both subjective theories of the good life, because the goodness of your life depends on what you want or believe, something that's happening in your head. Desires happen in your head. Pleasure happens in your head, kind of. I mean, I guess something feels good on your hand or something. In some sense, it's happening on your hand, but it all depends on the mental state, really, of pleasure. And so you could imagine other subjective theories of the good life. if you gave a theory of the good life that said your life is good just when, it's kind of hard to think of a different one. I mean, desire and pleasure are the things that are obviously that are the most obvious that the goodness of your life could depend on. But say you had a weird view on which your life is better just when you experience confusion. That'd be a strange view. Nobody thinks that. But that would be another subjective theory because, again, confusion is something that happens to mental states, something that happens in your head. Whereas objective theories of the good life, now you might think, well, clearly, what makes your life good is going to be something that's happening in your head, right? It's going to be something, some belief or desire. Oh, I guess another maybe more plausible subjective theory of the good life going back would be one on which your life is good just when you think it's good. So now it's not your desires or your pleasures that determine the goodness of your life. It's the beliefs that you have. That's what makes your life good, when you think your life is good. That'd be another subjective theory. And you might think, going back to the thought I just started, how could that fail to be true? What would it mean for the goodness of your life not to depend on what's going on in your mental state or in your head, so to speak? Well, there are objective theories of well-being or the good life. And they claim that certain things can be good for someone or bad for someone, regardless of what the person wants or believes or any of their mental states at all. And we're going to consider that. I'm going to make a separate video for that. This week's reading involved Jean Cazez's argument that there are objective aspects to the good life. Now, that if you have an objective theory of the good life, that doesn't mean you think that your mental states don't matter at all. It means that you think there are some things in addition to mental states that matter for the goodness of your life. So objectivists and subjectivists are going to agree usually that happiness can make your life better, or pleasure can make your life better. The disagreement is whether there's anything that's not a mental state that can make your life better too, right? So objectivists are going to usually be what's called pluralists about well-being. They think not only that there's more than one thing that can make your life go well, right? Because they're going to admit that certain mental states like happiness or desire satisfaction can sometimes make your life go better. And they're going to say, but in addition, there are things that really aren't bound up essentially with your mental states that can make your life go better. What are those things? Well, we're going to talk about it. To give you just one example, think back to the objections we gave to hedonism. One of those objections was that it seems like in Truman's case, for example, he lacks autonomy. He's perfectly happy, but he lacks control over his life. Now, you might think, that isn't autonomy or choice something that's happening in his head? I would argue not completely. Choices start in your head, but whether you have autonomy often depends on the nature of the external world, right? What's inhibiting Truman's autonomy is that someone's keeping him from traveling, right? So his autonomy is inhibited by the fact that he can't fly to Jamaica or wherever it was. There was somewhere that he really wanted to go in the movie. I can't remember what it wasn't Jamaica. Or consider, we also talked about, I think, how you might think that what's going wrong in Truman's life is that he doesn't know something. He doesn't know that he's living in a false reality. So even though he has a perfectly pleasant life, his lack of knowledge makes his life go poorly. Now, again, you might think, isn't knowledge something that happens in your head? And the answer is yes, partially. But knowledge is also about something that's happening in the world, right? If you know that the physical world is composed of atoms, that's partially because you have a certain belief, and it's partially because the physical world is actually composed of atoms. You can't know something that's not true. That's a general claim in what's called epistemology, or the theory of knowledge. You cannot know what's not true. You cannot know that 2 + 2 = 5 because it's not true that 2 + 2 = 5. You can strongly believe it, but you can't know it. And so knowledge is something that is at least partially objective. It depends on the state of the world outside of your own mind. And so, again, if you thought that someone's life could go better to the extent that they have knowledge, then you're going to be an objective or an objectivist about well-being, because well-being depends at least partially and sometimes on what's happening outside of someone's head. Okay, so that's a broad classification within theories of the good life. It's a really important one to find out because it helps us to kind of see the map of where things fall. Desire, satisfaction theory, and hedonism tend to actually have a lot in common. They have at least this in common. They agree that the good life is subjective. Depends on what's happening in somebody's head. Whereas someone like Kazez and her theory is going to be an objective theory. So there's a deep disagreement between those two camps. Okay, let's go back for a second. I want to consider one hard case, or one at least apparently hard case right off the bat. There are lots of these kinds of cases and nothing essentially bound up with it being an alcoholic. But essentially it seems like there are lots of cases where someone wants something that is horribly destructive for them. And how can the desire satisfaction deal with such cases? So what I want to do is, I'm saving the next video for talking about objections to desire satisfaction theory, but I want to consider this one early because it's going to show us that the theory is actually much more nuanced than you might think if you raise this sort of objection to the theory, okay? So it's going to help us understand the theory, and that's the point of considering the objection here. We'll actually consider objections to the theory later in a second video, but this is going to help us understand the complexity of the theory. Seems really easy. Getting what you want is good for you. And that's essentially the theory, but we're going to see some of the details here. Okay, so consider this case. The alcoholic who just wants to drink himself silly each night, wants to die early because he's horribly depressed or something like this. I don't know, whatever. He gets what he wants when his life is in shambles. He drinks himself silly. His relationships fall apart. That's what he wanted, or he at least wanted to numb himself. And that's what he gets, and his life falls apart. And so we can ask, is it really good for him to get what he wants? It kind of seems like it's definitely not. It'd be better for him to not get what he wanted, right? That's what happens when we try to put our relatives or friends in rehab or get them at least on the right track, is that we're saying what you want is actually really bad for you. We want you not to get what you want. And that's because we want what's best for you. Right? So how can the desire satisfaction theorists deal with this? Well, here's what I think they're going to say. They're going to say that yes, insofar as he gets what he wants in drinking himself silly, that is good for him. However, they'll say, what he wants is to drink himself silly and be numbed. And the things that are actually bad for him that we think of as really bad for him, like losing, let's say, destroys his relationship with his daughter, he loses his job, he dies early maybe, or ruins his liver, whatever. It's not for those things. He's not wanting those things when he drinks himself silly. He just wants to be numbed to the pain, right? He doesn't want his relationship with his daughter to be destroyed, for example. So we don't want to say, and you might imagine him, that what the desire satisfaction theorists will say is that in most cases, and in the typical case, even though he gets what he wants in drinking himself silly, he's also frustrating. He's actually making his choice to drink results in many of his other desires not being satisfied, and in him actually getting something that he wants not to happen. He wants to keep his relationship with his daughter, for example. And so when he drinks, he's also getting something he wants to not happen. It's not something that he just has no desires about, like we talked about earlier. It's something that he actually wants to not happen. He wants it not to happen, that his relationship with his daughter is destroyed. And so the desire satisfaction theorist will say, yeah, he gets one thing that he wants when he drinks, but it's far outweighed by all the things he loses that he wants, right? He loses his relationship with his daughter, which he wants. And they'll say, and in the typical case, were he adequately reflecting on this, he would realize that he actually wants a relationship with his daughter more than he wants to be numbed to the pain. And so on the whole, drinking himself silly is actually bad for him, and we can explain that just in terms of what he wants. which is what they need to do. They need to explain why it's bad for him in terms of only of desire satisfaction. They need to explain why, on the whole, he gets less of what he wants when he drinks himself silly. So they'll say they will grant us that he does get one thing that he wants in drinking himself silly, but he loses far more things that he wants in drinking himself silly. Now, the way to get at this question is they'll come back and they'll say, listen, suppose that we consider two situations, one in which the alcoholic drinks himself silly and loses his relationship with his daughter. Now consider another situation where he also loses his relationship with his daughter, and he also doesn't get to numb the pain. So he doesn't get, consider the simple situation in which he only wants two things. He wants to numb the pain and he wants to keep his relationship with his daughter. Now compare these two situations. In one, he numbs the pain and loses his relationship with his daughter. So he gets one of the two things that he wants. And in another, he doesn't numb the pain and he also loses his relationship with his daughter. So he gets neither of the two things that he wants. Which is better? Wouldn't it be better if he got to numb the pain, assuming that he's going to lose his relationship with his daughter, they'll say? And you might say, well, yeah, I guess so. And they'll say, well, okay, so that shows that it actually is good for him. We would all admit that it is good for him when considered alone and on its own to numb the pain. What makes it bad for him is losing all this other stuff. And they say, well, but we can explain why losing all that other stuff is bad. He doesn't want that, right? And we can also explain why it's better, assuming that he's going to lose all that stuff, it's better for him to numb the pain than not to numb the pain because he wants to numb the pain. And so they'll say, we actually get a better result in this situation than lots of other theories can. We can explain why on the whole it's bad for him, but it's only on the whole bad for him to drink himself silly because of other things that he'll lose. It's actually a little bit good for him that he gets to numb the pain. It's just outweighed by all the things he loses that he wants. Okay, so that's the theory. So we all obviously have lots of complex desires. I'm going to move away from the screen just for a second. We have lots of complex desires. We're obviously, I said we were going to simplify by saying he only has two desires because we obviously want lots of different things. And so what this example shows us is that desire satisfaction theory says that your life goes better with each desire that gets satisfied, right? But that doesn't mean that just because you get what you want in one case, your life is going to be good. In fact, you may get what you want on this theory and still have a bad life on the whole. Because since you have a bunch of different desires, you can get one thing you want and still have lots of unmet desires, right? So it's a little more nuanced of a theory. You can't refute it by just saying, oh, well, look, someone got what they wanted and their life still sucks. What you really need, so they have a theory of what makes your life go better in individual cases. It's getting something that you want, but that gives us a bigger theory of what makes someone's life good on the whole, and that's having more of their desires be met. Right? So you have lots of desires and your life goes better as more of them get met. And if all of them are met, you just have the perfect life. And if none of them are met, you have the worst life. So this sort of example is not going to be the perfect counterexample. What we would really need is a case where either one of two things holds. They get a desire met and their life isn't better. Or they have tons of their desires met, but they still don't live a good life at all, right? Similarly, well, we'll talk about objections later, but that's sort of the nuance of the view, right? Your life goes better if one desire is satisfied, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your life is good. You can still have a horrible life and have a desire satisfied. So you have to weigh up all the desires being satisfied against all the ones not being satisfied, and that will give you a view to the goodness of a life on the whole, right? Okay. Belabored that point enough. Okay, so let's move on. So it turns out that two of the arguments we said worked in hedonism's favor also work as arguments that favor desire satisfaction theory. Desire satisfaction theory can account for the variety of good lives because people want different things. So of course, what a good life depends on, or what a good life looks like will differ very depending on the person, right? If you like lots of social interactions, if that's what you want, then your life, a good life for you is going to involve lots of friends. If you're an introvert and you don't want that, a good life for you is going to look different. It's going to involve fewer friends, probably. And personal authority, we have authority over what constitutes a good life for us because it's our desires that determine what a good life is. There's no demands external to us that determine the goodness of our life independent of us. Okay, those are arguments for desire satisfaction theory that hedonists also work in favor of hedonism. But let's talk about one argument for desire satisfaction theory real quick before we end the video that is unique to desire satisfaction theory. We talked about how these two theories come apart, and one way that they come apart in addition is that there's this argument, a very strong historical argument going back even to Plato, as we'll see, for desire satisfaction theory that doesn't work in favor of hedonism. Okay, here's how the argument goes. Well, let's actually stay back at this other slide for just a second and talk about it at an informal level. The argument goes something like this. If something's good for you, isn't it the kind of thing that could motivate you to get it? Isn't that what kind of part of what it is for something to be good for you? Something that could move you, right? Something can't be good for you and have no power over you, right? It's like, remember back, maybe you're still a teenager, but remember back to your early teenage days, or maybe you still feel like this towards your parents or some other authority, where, they tell you that something is good for you. And you'd say, there's this part of you that pushed back against that because you just couldn't bring yourself to want that thing or to be motivated to do that thing, right? For me, I was a Boy Scout, a reluctant Boy Scout. I think I'm super into Boy Scoutish things. Like I camp and make fires from scratch and all that stuff. And I love doing it. It's super fun to me. I think for me, side note, it was mostly a social thing. I was in a Boy Scout troop with kids who didn't go to my school, and they all went to a school together. And so I was kind of excluded. Oh, let's cry about it. Whatever. The point is, I hated going to Boy Scout meetings. I hated going to Boy Scout camp. I went virtually every summer, but I kind of hated it. But my mom always made me go. And it's because, I don't know if she ever said it explicitly, but she thought it was good for me. She thought it'd be a good thing for me to do. Be good for me to do that. And I couldn't get it, right? And from my perspective then, I said, I know that it's not good for me. There's no part of me that wants to do this, right? It's not even something I want to do in the long term, but I kind of hate the grind of it. I've set this goal for myself that I think would be good to achieve, but I just hate the day-to-day of it. No, I just really just did not care about it at all at the time. And in that way, I could have justifiably made a claim that it was not actually good for me, right? How can something be good for you if there's just no part of yourself, past, present, or future, that cares about it? So that's the idea behind this argument. The idea being, look, if you take that as a general constraint on a theory of the good life, that if something can't be good for you if you're not motivated to get it, then it looks like desire satisfaction theory is probably the only theory that's really going to work, because it's the only theory that predicts you'll always be motivated to do what is good for you. Because what are you always motivated to do? The thing that you want to do. You're not always motivated to do the thing that gives you pleasure even. So hedonism can't explain this general constraint. That is, again, just to repeat, that for something to be good for you, you have to be motivated to do it. So if there's a theory that says, well, something can be good for you sometimes, even if you're not motivated to get it, then that's a bad theory. If you can believe what I just said, that to be good for you, you have to be motivated to do the thing. So even hedonism is going to fail this constraint, because you can find cases where something would be pleasant for you and you're not motivated to get it, right? These are a little hard to come by. See if you can think of any of these where something would be pleasant for you, but you're not at all motivated to do it. I'm thinking of cases where, maybe the right case would be a case where maybe you think something is morally wrong or something like that, or maybe just despicable. Like that might be a better case to look at. You think something is morally despicable, like you're disgusted at a deep moral level by something. And you do know that, like, if you were to do it in some real superficial sense, it would be pleasant, right? Maybe even just on a bodily sense. That's maybe the easiest way you can imagine something being pleasant, but still being totally disgusted by it. In that case, are you motivated to do it at all? Like, do you have any part of you that is drawn to that thing? You might think no. You can imagine cases. I don't want to get controversial here, so I won't give any of my cases, but things that you're morally disgusted by that might be pleasant. And maybe you can think of one for yourself and ask whether you're motivated at all to do it. Motivated doesn't mean that you're going to do it, but basically the question is, are you at all in any sense drawn towards it? If you can find any case like that, then hedonism is going to fail this constraint. Now, objectivist theories are certainly going to fail this constraint, right? Consider the view on which knowledge is objectively good for us. On that view, there's certainly going to be cases where we could know something if we tried and we're just totally unmotivated to do it. There's no part of us that cares about doing that thing. Like, look, I could gain a lot of knowledge right now just by looking on the internet about astrology. Now, astrology is like, you might think it's a bogus field, but you could still gain knowledge about what people have said or thought or something like that. You can know that so-and-so said this about your sign or whatever like that. Now, I know that I could know that if I wanted to. I have no part of me that cares at all about that. Totally unmotivated. And so on that view, on that objectivist view that says knowledge is always good for you, it turns out they're committed to there being things that are good for me that I'm totally unmotivated to pursue. Okay, let's look at the argument now. So this first premise gives us the general constraint that I just gave. If something's truly good for you, then you'll be motivated to get it, as long as you know about it and know how to get it. In the case of the astrology, in the astrology case I just gave, I know about that there are people who have talked about astrology and people who have talked about your sign or whatever like that, and I know how to get it. I just look up on Wikipedia, right? But I just totally unmotivated. So the second premise says, gives the argument that I just made in formal terms. For any given, especially objective criterion of well-being, on any given objective theory of well-being, the stuff that's good for you is going to be something that, at least in some cases, you can know about and you know how to get it, and you're just totally unmotivated. Consider a view on which athletic excellence is objectively good for someone. It's objectively good for humans in general to excel athletically, or even just physically in terms of your physical health. That's physical health, let's say, is objectively good for you on some theories of well-being. There are tons of people in the world who know about health, and they know how to achieve health, and they just don't give a crap about it. They're totally unmotivated. So that means if you accept the first premise, if you accept this general constraint on theories of well-being, then health can't be good for people. And similarly for essentially any objective good that you could propose, and even some subjective goods, if you think that you could be unmotivated to pursue your own pleasure sometimes. Here's the thing, though. You will never be unmotivated to pursue what you want, because that's part of what it is to be motivated, to want that thing, right? If you want something, you will be motivated to get it. That's part of what motivation is. That's maybe the essence of what motivation is on some theories of motivation. And so it looks like desire satisfaction theory can account for the truth of one, and at least most other theories can't. So where does this first premise come from? You might think, well, crap, if that's what it entails, then I just don't believe one. Well, look, this isn't going to give you really an argument for one, but I'm going to talk to you about the history a little bit of people making this claim about motivation. That is premise one in that argument. So here's an excerpt from the Protagoras, which is a Platonic dialogue. Then if let me just read it out for you. Then if I proceeded, the pleasant is good. No one who has knowledge or thought of other actions is better than those he is doing, and as possible will do as he proposes if he is free to do the better ones. And this yielding to oneself is nothing but ignorance, and mastery of oneself is as certainly wisdom. Here's the important part. No one willingly goes after evil or what he thinks to be evil. It is not in human nature, apparently, to do so, to wish to go after what one thinks to be evil in preference to the good. And when compelled to choose one of two evils, no one will choose the greater when he may the lesser. All this met with the assent of everyone. This is the person describing, this dialogue that they had with people. Okay, so the claim here, I think it's put pretty powerfully here by Socrates. Socrates is the speaker in this dialogue at this point. Who imagine saying to someone, I offer you two things. You happen to think that thing A is better than thing B. They're equally easy to get, etc. But you're going to go after the worse of the two, the one you think is worse rather than the one you think is better. How would you ever do that unless you didn't know, unless it was out of ignorance? You didn't know that A was available, so you chose B. Or you thought that A would be so much harder to get than B. Or you were deceived as to which one was better, right? If you really think that they're equally easy to get, achieve, and one is genuinely better than the other, on the whole, who in God's name would choose the worse of the two? So argues Socrates. And what's behind that claim is a general claim about motivation. So if you really think that something is overall best, you will decisively be motivated to do that. You cannot fail. Not only does Socrates think you'll be motivated to do it, but you'll be motivated to the point of action. That's a stronger claim. You can be motivated to do something that you don't act upon, right? That's part of what temptation is when you successfully defend against it, right? One of the things that's happening in temptation is you're motivated to do something. There's a desire in you to do that thing, and you don't act on it, but you're still motivated. Now, to be decisively motivated to do that thing is to be motivated in such a way as to form an intention to act, right? I don't form an intention to act when I'm tempted to do something and I resist. I'm motivated without being decisively motivated. Socrates is making a super strong claim here. He thinks if you're really convinced that something is overall best, you will decisively be motivated to do that thing. You will intend to do it. Maybe someone will externally prevent you, but in terms of what's going on inside of you, you're going to do it. Now, historically speaking, this is a really strong claim, and philosophers have weakened it to a weaker claim. They think, look, we don't want to buy into all that. But we will claim that if you think of something as overall best, you'll at least be somewhat motivated to do it. You may not form an intention to do it, but you'll at least be somewhat motivated to do it. Now, I challenge y'all, if you're still watching the video, if you're still not slumped in your chairs, just worn out by all this, here's what the argument actually needs if it's to succeed. And you can just go back and compare this to one. It's a different formula. It's a different wording, but it's the same claim. If something is good for someone, then that person will be motivated to do that thing. Compare this to the weaker claim or to Socrates' claim. How is it different? You can pause here if you want to try it out for yourself. How is, for example, this claim, what the argument needs, different from the weaker claim or the weak claim? Take a pause. Now, if you did that, what you may have seen is that the weaker claim and Socrates' claims, Socrates' claim is about what someone thinks is best. Whereas what the argument needs is a claim is about what is actually good for someone. And that's not about what someone thinks is good for themselves, right? So it might actually be more plausible that if you think something is good, you'll be motivated to do it than the claim that if it's actually good for you, you'll be motivated to do it. But I leave that up to y'all. But this is what the argument actually needs. Now, if you're with me, you might not find this claim particularly plausible. I don't find this plausible, but I'm also really disposed to objective theories of well-being, just to kind of play my hand here. And so maybe that's what's going into it. But this has been one of the most powerful arguments for desire satisfaction theory, because it alone can account for this truth, if you think it's a truth, that if something's good for you, you're going to be motivated to do it. It has to be something that could in principle motivate you. And this, of course, is just a formulation of how the desire satisfaction theorists can explain why we're motivated to pursue. And this is just summarizing. I'm not going to walk through this with you. This is summarizing the claim I just made, or the argument I just made. Okay, so we'll stop there. This has been a longer video. Just to summarize, we gave you the desire satisfaction theory. We talked about how it's different from hedonism, where it's going to come apart, especially where pleasure and desire satisfaction come apart. We tried to put a little nuance to it here by saying, well, the theory doesn't entail that just because you get one thing that you want, your life is going well, right? That's what the point of this example was. That got a little long-winded here, but the point of this example was the theory is not committed to the claim that just because you get what you want in one case, your life is good. They'll be able to say that you can get what you want and your life is bad because you still aren't getting lots of other things that you want, or you're getting lots of other things that you don't want. Okay, we gave this general distinction between objective and subjective theories, which helps us to explain why desire satisfaction theorists and hedonists are on the same page about a lot. They're both subjective theories of well-being, and later we'll consider at least one objective theory of well-being. We talked about two familiar arguments for the desire satisfaction theory, and then one distinct argument which is supposed to distinguish desire satisfaction theory even above other subjective theories like hedonism. But as we saw, even though one of the claims is really similar to a claim that has historically been made, but going back all the way to Plato and Socrates, it's importantly different, right? And because it's about what is actually good for you, entailing motivation, rather than what you think is good for you, entailing motivation, it might not be as strong of a claim as, for example, even Socrates' claim. Okay, and that is where we will stop. In our next video, we'll talk about problems for desire satisfaction theory.